Give me an example, I asked her once. I can't remember exactly what she said, but it went something like this. People think that if you put a blindfold on someone who can see, they'll experience what it's like to be blind, she said. The only thing they'll experience is fear. They're only going to end up afraid of bumping into something or falling on their faces. I'm not scared of the dark, she said. I don't know what darkness is, other than something familiar, so why should I be afraid of it? I think I made her uncomfortable with my sudden silence as I pondered this, so she was quick to add that she'd forgotten to pack her audiobooks for the trip. That's the real reason she wanted me to read to her, she claimed. She asked me to choose something to read from the book she got for her birthday. She likes books. Not everything is in Braille or recorded. Susan reads a lot to Marianne, although she often passes over questionable passages in a book. Marianne can always sense something is about to be censored because her mother's rhythm slows down and the words suddenly have clumsy little pauses between them as Susan glances ahead to what's coming up and bleeps out all the swear words and references to sex. Fortunately, the book Marianne has with her isn't one of those long literary books. It's raunchy in parts, but nothing she wouldn't hear on television. She lasted through 2 stories before falling asleep. I sat there for another half hour, singing to her, trying to catch the sprinkle of freckles across the bridge of her nose when the light fell on it. She's been asleep for a couple of hours now, and I've stuck my head in her room a dozen times to make sure she's still breathing. Typical dad. But the truth is, this trip is different from all the previous ones. It's only the second time I've had Marianne all to myself for more than a weekend. I was worried we'd tire of each other after a couple of days. Okay, I was worried she would get tired of me. Then again, our vacation last year was really good. I flew out to Vancouver to fetch her, and we returned to Halifax the next day. I had a wicked case of jet lag, but those 10 days together just flew by. The big test was her trip home to Vancouver, and Marianne insisted on flying home. She didn't want me making a 3rd trip across the skies on her behalf. I started missing her as soon as she went through the gate in Halifax, but I was also relieved when she finally called and told me she was home again. In fact, the relief was a natural high that I've never experienced before. I decided that I never wanted her to travel again. I figured that as long as she stays in one place, she's safe, or at least I'm safe. Do you think all parents feel that way? What a stupid question. How could either of you answer that? Everything was going well this summer until the dog had to go and die. Marianne and I are barely on speaking terms, although she said she didn't mean the things she said yesterday. Whether she meant them or not, every word was true. You can't change history, not mine anyway. My whole life is about history. It seems that I'm always on this side of what happened, past tense. For once, I'd like to stay in the present where it's a lot safer. It was the same when we were kids, wasn't it? I was always defying the conventional wisdom that triplets acted as one. Whatever you were doing, Rory, or you, Adrian, I was doing the opposite. I couldn't even find a place to stand that was safe. Dad took us fishing in Margaree once, and he told the 3 of us not to get behind him when he cast the line. You both had the good sense to move to the side. Me, I backed up about 20 feet, standing directly behind him. He cracked his fishing rod like a whip, and the next thing I knew, he had hooked my earlobe. The funny thing is, nothing ever seemed to feel like it was about to go wrong. I wasn't equipped with any of those premonitions that warn other people. I didn't have any antennas. Eventually, I realized that if I could just concentrate more on the here and on the now, I'd make out a lot better, stay where I was, and let things happen to the world around me. Like one of those mammoths stuck in the Siberian ice. They seem to have managed okay. Millions of years have passed and the world has changed 1 trillion times. But you thaw one of those suckers out and they say that the fur on those beasts is silky and the food in their stomachs is fresh. Being frozen in time definitely has its advantages. Okay, those mammoths are dead, but that's beside the point. I'm not good at making analogies, but I'm sure you both get my point. Now is good. For too many years, yesterday, last week, or last month was simply shit. The last few years have been good. I haven't done any drugs other than weed. My meds keep my mood swings in check. I've got a good carpentry business happening, and I sing in a wicked choir. Then the dog died. Tenderfoot was in his place of honor at the front of the canoe. The mist was rising from the bay, and the sun was burning it off. It was going to be a scorcher, and we wanted to be out on the bay and back on shore before it got too hot. The canoe was gliding through the water, and occasionally I took a swig of coffee from the thermos. I'm no morning person, as you both know, so I dozed off. It was no big deal. It wasn't the first time. And when I say dozed, it was maybe just for a minute, two. But then again, yesterday was longer. Maybe. I don't know. I woke with a start because the canoe was rocking and Marianne was shouting after Tenderfoot. At first I couldn't see a thing because we were passing through a thick patch of fog. I could hardly see Marianne, and when I did locate her, she was hanging over the side, dangerously close to falling in. I pulled her down into the boat. Immediately she tried to get up again, back to the side, but I restrained her. She was screaming now, telling me that Tenderfoot wasn't in the boat. I could barely see the prow, but it was true. The dog had gone over. By this point, I was yelling myself. I told Marianne to shut up, twice. I'd never told her to shut up before. But I was feeling panicky, okay? I didn't want her going over the side. I didn't want the canoe capsizing and have to locate her in the fog. Shut up. The echo came back to me, but Marianne was at least calmer now. She crouched on the bottom of the canoe, her hands holding onto the sides, the dozen bangles on her arms making a soft, jingling sound. She was sobbing. I tried to wipe away a tear, but she jerked her face away from me. There was no time to tell her that I was sorry for yelling at her. She was almost hysterical. I would have explained this to her. But like I said, there was no time for any of that. I had to find the dog, so I kept very quiet and strained my hearing best I could, trying to pick up the sounds of the dog paddling through the water, but I couldn't hear a thing. It was so goddamn quiet, except for Marianne's big sobs. I asked her to listen for Tenderfoot. I reminded her that she could hear a lot better than me, and if she listened carefully, she could guide me to Tenderfoot. All dogs could swim, I told her. All dogs. Hadn't Tenderfoot proven that? This wasn't the first time he had leaped into the water. For the past week, he had jumped over the side of the boat and paddled around the canoe. Then I'd haul him back in. I just didn't realize that Tenderfoot was short on endurance. Once around the canoe was probably his limit. Marianne wiped away the tears and sat up. Neither of us dared to break the silence. We had to find Tenderfoot. Then Marianne began to shake her head, small shakes of doubt. I was watching her. She was mouthing the name of her dog, probably afraid that if she said it out loud, she might miss placing his location. My heart was in my throat watching her. I tore my eyes away and I panned the bay. I whispered to her. I asked her to tell me when he had jumped overboard. She whispered back, maybe 10 minutes ago. I ventured a second question. How long was she calling to him before I woke up? Maybe 3 or 4 minutes, she said. Too long, Daddy. You wouldn't wake up. It took you too long. It sounded like the sharp hiss that comes from the pressure tube on a tire when you squeeze it. Too long. We both started calling out his name. Together, then we took turns. Tenderfoot wasn't answering. Marianne made me keep paddling in circles, bigger circles each time. She made me stay out on the bay until all the fog had cleared. Only when she could feel the sun on her face from every direction did she let me take us back to shore. It's in neither of our natures to hope, so we weren't expecting he'd be there ahead of us, sunning himself on the wharf. And he wasn't. Tenderfoot was gone. He had jumped out of the canoe and probably got disoriented. He swam through a fog bank in the wrong direction and swam farther and farther away from us. If he had struggled, we didn't hear it because Marianne was shouting. Or maybe he just fell below the waves with his lungs filled with water, pulling him down to the floor of the bay. Marianne was shaky when we got out of the canoe. I was shaky. But it's dangerous for a blind person to be shaky and upset. She walked a few steps along the wharf, uncertainly, and sat down, holding her knees. Now she allowed herself to cry for herself and for Tenderfoot. When Marianne loses something, it's always just within reach. She's explained this to me a million times. When she drops a bookmark or one of her bangles, it's there, close. That's how she perceives the world. Everything is just within reach. The world is neither round nor flat. Nothing falls off the edge. She's the center of her own universe, and all the edges bend toward the middle, which makes losing a living thing harder to accept for Marianne. She half believes it will reveal itself as alive and well, sooner or later, if she just waits and keeps looking. Sooner or later, it will roll inward, a law of nature, or someone else will bring it back to her. Lost things, lost people, and dead dogs are only temporarily so. And when she finally accepts the death, long after the rest of us, the dead person or animal is never far away, is never truly lost or forgotten. There's always the chance that gravity will roll it in. Marianne sat on the wharf and hoped that Tenderfoot was close, if not visible. He might even be dead, but he was within reach. But Marianne was also bitter. What happened to Tenderfoot was my responsibility, she said. I should have kept an eye on him. Both eyes, she stressed. Instead, Susan used to always say this just before she shattered my present and hurled me into the past, creating more history for me. Instead, you were high, Daddy. How could you do that to us? To us meant to her, to Susan, to Tenderfoot, not to me. I'm not high, I said. This was the truth. But you take all those medications, she answered. There's a difference, I pleaded. Nothing more was said. I asked your neighbor to take us out in his outboard Rory to look for Tenderfoot after we settled Marianne in the cottage. His wife insisted on staying with her, holding on to her small hand while her husband and I went out to search. I was grateful. Marianne easily accepted the generosity and comfort from the wife. That's another thing with the blind. There are no strangers. All people are close, some closer than others. I found Tenderfoot the day after Marianne returned to Vancouver. I wanted to sleep under the stars. I took the canoe and wove my way through the string of small islands out in the bay until I found one I liked. I gathered some wood along the beach and lit a small bonfire. After I had it up and roaring, I decided to stockpile some extra branches. I spied a log farther down the beach that looked promising and went after it. I was no more than 3 feet from the log when I discovered that it was an animal. I experienced the same sudden flutter in my chest as the time I unexpectedly stumbled across a seal carcass walking along the shoreline in Myra. It was Tenderfoot, and he wasn't dead, but he was dying. He was lying on his side. There didn't appear to be any wound that I could see. He was too far up the beach to have been washed in by the tide. He was facing the trees. I think he was heading for shelter when he collapsed. I didn't know that he was alive at first. He didn't move when I approached, not so much as a roll of the head in my direction, but I could see his stomach rise and fall, and that produced another flutter in my chest, mixed with a sudden squirt of bile in the back of my throat. He made no sound, so I can only imagine that he was beyond pain and suffering. Maybe he had a stroke. My head filled with 1,000 different things. Should I lift him into the canoe, go for help? Will he bite me if I try to move him? Or there were endless options, but no available solution. My knees turned to jelly. I fell to my haunches and I began to sob. I couldn't take my eyes off of him, and I couldn't stop the flow of tears. I could see the rise and fall of his chest. I don't know how long I sat there, an hour, maybe 2, but his chest stopped moving long before I stopped crying. I didn't want to leave Tenderfoot there on the beach to rot and get pecked away by crows, but I didn't have the energy or stomach to start digging a hole and cover him with dirt. I dragged him to the shore and hoisted him into the canoe. I filled 4 or 5 plastic bags with sand and headed out on the bay. It was dark and I had only the occasional sparkle of a light from one of the cottages in the distance to guide me if I got lost. I made sure I was far enough away from the small islands so that the water was good and deep when I pushed him over the side. I didn't want any risk of him floating back to shore. I tied a bag tightly around each paw and dropped them over the side. It only took a little more exertion from me before his body quickly followed after the bags. He was below the water in a second, and I paddled away. As I headed in the general direction of the cottage, I thought I'd call Susan and tell her to give Marianne the message about Tenderfoot. But Marianne didn't need Susan censoring all of her headaches. That was my responsibility. Thank you. Oh, all right. I won't go away. I got some frog in my throat.
A frog in your throat, as long as it's not a dog in your throat.
Yes, it's no dog.
It was a very moving reading. Thank you
you.
very much. Yeah, you know, we call our reading series here at the Killam Library the written word coming to life. And it's true that when you're reading a really good book, a whole world comes to life in your head, but it never ceases to amaze me what kind of spell is woven by somebody reading aloud. And you know, it's like, I remember when I was a kid and listening to radio dramas, this is dating me, okay? But just, it's like the theater just
Yes.
opens in your head. Just listening to somebody else, and it's a completely different experience.
Well, it's also interesting to hear somebody else read your work too, because you know, they'll put their imprint on it, and you know, everybody's voice is different. Everybody has a different poetry to their voice, and sometimes you can listen to your own words and recognize something in it that you haven't heard before, or you're not even aware of. So it's quite wonderful to hear things being read aloud. And you know, because I've spent so many hours in cars going back and forth from Cape Breton to Halifax over the years, I listened to quite a few audiobooks, and that's been a great savior for those, you know, tedious travels. And they're just so wonderful. You stay focused while you're driving, but you're just, the lulling of that voice is so comforting.
Yeah, lulling is a good way to put it. Now, I'm going to take Mary Jane up on her challenge and ask you about your passion for writing.
Yes.
Which, knowing that you write kids' books, you write novels, you write short stories, you've written plays.
Yes.
Obviously, that is one kind of manifestation of this passion, but can you talk a little bit about writing in these very different forms and how that's sort of come about for you?
Well, it started, you know, my first foray into writing would have been playwriting. And from there, I moved into actually writing short stories. And it just so happened